Imagine this, a night like any other. You're driving down a quiet street when suddenly, without warning, you're pulled over by the police. But here's the twist, the officer isn't just any cop, he's a racist cop with one goal in mind, to ruin your night. What happens next? Well, it's not what you're expecting. The cop does the unthinkable, he handcuffs you, thinking he has all the power. But here's the shocking part, you're no ordinary person. What the officer doesn't know is that you're a federal FBI agent with a secret, and his worst nightmare is just beginning. Curious yet? Well, get ready for a thrilling ride full of action, suspense, and a plot twist you'll never see coming. Before we dive into this crazy story, I've got a question for you. What would you do if you were wrongly accused and handcuffed by a racist cop? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I'd love to hear your opinions. And hey, if you're excited to see where this story goes, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on what's coming next. Now, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Let me know in the comments so we can see how far this story reaches. The night air in downtown Chicago was thick with tension. The streets were quieter than usual, the occasional car rolling by with headlights slicing through the dark. Malcolm Hayes adjusted his coat, pulling it tight against the autumn chill. He had just wrapped up an exhausting undercover operation, and all he wanted was to get home, pour a drink, and breathe for a moment. But fate had other plans. As he walked past a convenience store, the bright fluorescent lights illuminated an unsettling scene. A young black teenager was pinned against the brick wall, a white police officer gripping his arm tightly. The kid, no older than 16, had fear in his eyes. "I didn't do nothing. Man." The teen pleaded. "You fit the description," the cop barked, pressing him harder against the wall. Malcolm stopped in his tracks. He knew this game all too well. A vague description was always an excuse. His instincts screamed at him to keep walking, to not blow his cover, but his conscience wouldn't let him. He stepped forward. "Officer, what seems to be the problem?" The cop turned, his face twisting in annoyance. He was stocky, mid-40s, with a thick mustache that twitched as he scowled. His badge read O'Reilly. "Mind your business," O'Reilly growled. Malcolm held up his hands. "I'm just a concerned citizen. Kid doesn't look like he's done anything." O'Reilly narrowed his eyes. "You got ID?" Malcolm wasn't about to hand over his credentials, not yet. Instead, he pulled out his wallet, showing his driver's license. "Look, I'm just passing by. If the kid's innocent, why not let him go?" Another cop approached, taller, leaner, and just as hostile. His name tag read Jenkins. "You interfering?" Malcolm forced a calm smile. "Not at all. Just making sure justice is being served." Jenkins exchanged a glance with O'Reilly. There was a moment of silent understanding before things escalated. Fast, Jenkins suddenly reached for his baton and swung. Malcolm saw it coming in time, dodging to the side. The baton missed his ribs by inches, but the message was clear, these cops weren't looking for conversation. O'Reilly lunged, grabbing Malcolm's wrist. His grip was tight, vice-like, but Malcolm twisted his arm, breaking free and stepping back. "Big mistake, boy," O'Reilly hissed, pulling his gun. Jenkins followed suit, drawing his weapon as well. Now, Malcolm was staring down two loaded pistols in the middle of an empty street. The teenager's eyes were wide with shock. "Yo, man, run." Malcolm didn't run, his training kicked in. With lightning speed, he ducked just as O'Reilly pulled the trigger. The shot exploded through the night, but Malcolm was already moving. His elbow slammed into Jenkins's wrist, knocking his gun aside. The bullet went wild, shattering a nearby street lamp. O'Reilly fired again. This time Malcolm spun, avoiding the shot before landing a brutal punch to the officer's jaw. The impact sent O'Reilly stumbling back, but he wasn't out. Jenkins recovered, swinging his baton again. Malcolm caught it mid-air and yanked it free, driving a hard kick into Jenkins's stomach. The officer gasped, doubling over. O'Reilly, now furious, raised his radio. "Officer down. We need backup." Malcolm cursed under his breath. This was getting out of control. More cops meant more danger. He needed to move. Jenkins recovered first, reaching for his gun again, but Malcolm was faster. He twisted the baton, slamming it across Jenkins's wrist. The gun clattered to the pavement. Malcolm kicked it far out of reach. That's when he heard it, sirens, multiple, They were coming, Malcolm's pulse pounded. He didn't want to start a war in the middle of the street, but he also wasn't about to let these racist cops take him down. Jenkins lunged again, but this time Malcolm went all in. He drove his fist into the officer's throat, making Jenkins choke and stagger backward. Before O'Reilly could fire another shot, Malcolm grabbed him by the wrist and twisted, forcing the gun from his hand. It hit the ground. For a second, the only sounds were their ragged breathing and the distant wail of police sirens. Jenkins clutched his throat, gasping. O'Reilly was on his knees. Stunned, Malcolm exhaled, stepping back. He had to think fast. He couldn't just stand here when more cops were inbound. "Hey, kid," he called to the teenager. "Get out of here. Now." The teen hesitated but then bolted into the night. Malcolm turned back to the two officers, who were now furious and humiliated. "You should have walked away," O'Reilly growled. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights flashed against the buildings. Malcolm raised his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in calculation. More cops meant more chaos, and he wasn't sure who was coming. More of O'Reilly's type, or someone who actually cared about justice. He had no intention of getting arrested. Not tonight, and definitely not by men like them. As the first patrol cars screeched to a halt, officers spilling out with weapons drawn, Malcolm clenched his fists, ready for whatever came next. This wasn't over, not even close. The police sirens blared through the street, echoing off the buildings. Malcolm's muscles tensed as he quickly analyzed the situation. 3 patrol cars had arrived, their doors swinging open as more officers spilled out, guns already drawn. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene in chaos. O'Reilly staggered to his feet, rubbing his jaw where Malcolm had landed a brutal punch. Jenkins was still gasping, holding his throat. But they weren't down for long. "There he is," O'Reilly barked, pointing at Malcolm. "He assaulted 2 officers. Take him down." Malcolm gritted his teeth. Liars. He hadn't even thrown the first punch. But he knew how this worked. These cops wouldn't listen to reason. They had already decided he was guilty. The first officer out of the squad car, a burly man with a buzz cut, wasted no time. "Hands up. Get on the ground, now." Malcolm didn't move. Jenkins coughed and straightened, his voice hoarse but sharp. "He's resisting. Take him down." 4 cops advanced, their weapons raised. Malcolm had seconds to act. Fight or surrender. He chose to fight. The first officer lunged, reaching for Malcolm's arm to force him down. Big mistake. Malcolm sidestepped, grabbing the officer's wrist and twisting it hard. The cop yelped in pain, his gun slipping from his fingers. Malcolm snatched it mid-air and, in a fluid motion, slammed the butt of the pistol into the cop's temple. The officer collapsed like a sack of bricks. The second officer fired. Malcolm dropped low, dodging just as the bullet whizzed over his shoulder. He rolled forward, coming up behind the shooter. In one swift motion, he drove an elbow into the cop's back. The officer stumbled, and Malcolm snatched the gun from his grip. Now, he was armed. "Hold your fire," one of the cops shouted. "He's got a gun." O'Reilly's face twisted in rage. "Shoot him, damn it." The night exploded in chaos. Bullets ripped through the air, shattering storefront windows, punching into parked cars. Malcolm dived behind a dumpster, his mind racing. They weren't just trying to arrest him. They were trying to kill him. He popped up, squeezing off a warning shot toward the ground. The officers hesitated. Good. Let them think. Let them hesitate. Malcolm sprinted, weaving between parked cars as gunfire followed him. He needed cover, something solid. A nearby alleyway caught his eye. Move. Now, he bolted. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he ignored the pain. He dived into the alleyway, rolling behind a set of trash cans. The cops regrouped, their footsteps pounding toward him. O'Reilly's voice cut through the night. "We got him cornered. Move in." Malcolm's breathing was steady. They thought they had him trapped. They were dead wrong. He reached into his coat, pulling out a secondary weapon, his Glock 19. He had been undercover, but he wasn't stupid enough to walk the streets unarmed. The first cop entered the alley. Malcolm saw the shadow move and fired first. The shot slammed into the officer's vest, knocking him backward. Another cop came next. Malcolm kicked out, sending him flying into the brick wall. O'Reilly cursed. "This son of a..." A shot whizzed past Malcolm's head. He turned, firing back. The bullet smashed into a patrol car's windshield, forcing the cops to duck. Jenkins, now furious, took cover behind a car and barked into his radio. "We need SWAT. Now." Malcolm's heart pounded. They were escalating fast. He needed an exit, but he also needed to send a message. These racist cops thought they were hunting a regular black man. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Malcolm took a deep breath. Time to remind. The night was alive with chaos. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the alley in a surreal glow, making every moving shadow seem bigger, every moment more intense. Malcolm could hear the cops reorganizing outside. He knew they were bringing in reinforcements. Jenkins had already called for SWAT. That meant he had less than 5 minutes before things got even worse. Malcolm checked his Glock. Half a mag left. Not ideal, but he had skill, something these cops weren't ready for. Footsteps approached. A cop tried to sneak in from the side, thinking Malcolm was distracted. Wrong move. Malcolm spun, grabbing the officer's wrist and yanking him forward. The cop barely had time to gasp before Malcolm smashed his head into the wall. The officer slumped to the ground, unconscious. O'Reilly's voice was shrill with rage. "We're not losing him. Jenkins, flank him from the other side." Malcolm's eyes flickered upward. The fire escape. His exit. Gunfire erupted again. Sparks flew as bullets ripped through metal and brick. Malcolm dashed forward, leaping onto a dumpster and grabbing the fire escape ladder. "Where the hell is he going?" Jenkins shouted, "Shoot him down." O'Reilly ordered. Bullets rained toward Malcolm as he climbed fast, his muscles burning. A shot grazed the metal just inches from his hand. Another one tore through his coat sleeve, but he kept moving. He reached the rooftop, pulling himself up just as more sirens echoed from the distance. The city spread out before him, rooftops, alleyways, escape routes. He ran. Down below, the cops scrambled. "He's on the roof." Jenkins grabbed his radio. "Helicopter support. We need eyes in the sky." Malcolm cursed. They were pulling out all the stops. He sprinted across the rooftop, leaping over an air conditioning unit, vaulting over a low railing. He needed to get down to street level, fast. Behind him, more cops climbed the fire escape. No time. Malcolm spotted an old metal pipe running down the side of the building. It wasn't ideal, but it was his best bet. He grabbed it and slid down fast, the heat from friction burning his palms. As he hit the ground, he rolled and dashed into the shadows. The moment he hit the street, he saw them, more squad cars. More officers. And now, an armored SWAT truck. Malcolm exhaled sharply. Time to change tactics. He spotted a motorcycle parked near the curb, a sleek black Yamaha. Perfect. He sprinted toward it, yanking the unconscious driver off in one swift move. The engine roared as he revved it, the vibration pulsing beneath him. Then, tires screeched. A police SUV swerved into his path. O'Reilly stood in front of it, his gun aimed dead at Malcolm. "Get off the bike, now." Malcolm smirked. Not happening. He twisted the throttle and gunned it. O'Reilly's eyes went wide. "Oh, SH." Malcolm swerved at the last second, dodging around the SUV just as O'Reilly fired. The shot missed, sparking off a lamppost. Jenkins leaped into his own cruiser. "We're in pursuit." The chase was on. Malcolm tore down the street, weaving through traffic. Cars honked, brakes screeched. He leaned into the bike, maneuvering with precision as the cops followed, their sirens blaring. Up ahead, a police roadblock. 2 cruisers formed a barricade, officers taking cover behind their doors. Malcolm's mind raced. Go through or go around? Then, he spotted it, a narrow alley just wide enough for the bike. He made his choice. At the last moment, he jerked the handlebars and veered left, straight into the alley. The cops weren't ready. Damn it, he's going off-road. Malcolm's bike roared down the narrow space, dodging trash bins and crates. He burst onto another street, weaving through more traffic. Jenkins and the others tried to follow, but they were too slow. Malcolm smiled. He had the advantage, for now. Malcolm's heart raced as the chase intensified. His muscles burned from the tension, his grip tight on the motorcycle's handlebars, but he couldn't afford to slow down, not now. He shot a glance over his shoulder. The police were still on him, but they were losing ground. They didn't know the city like he did. They didn't know the hidden routes, the shortcuts, the blind corners, but the SWAT truck. That was a different beast. It roared into the street behind him, heavy-duty tires chewing up the pavement as it gained on him with terrifying speed. He could feel the vibrations from its engine through the asphalt. This wasn't just a chase anymore. The SWAT truck swerved left, aiming to block him off. But Malcolm was already anticipating it. He twisted the throttle, the bike's engine growling louder. He shot between two parked cars, narrowly dodging a pair of officers trying to intercept him. A gunshot rang out as one of the cops tried to take him down, but the bullet missed by a mile. The road ahead split. One path led into a dense area of warehouses, the other veered toward the more open streets. Malcolm made a split-second decision and shot right into the warehouse district. The bike roared through a narrow alleyway, flanked by massive steel doors and crates stacked high on both sides. Behind him, the SWAT truck was too wide to follow, its tires skidding as it tried to make the turn. He smirked, knowing that they'd lose precious seconds trying to get through, but the cops on motorcycles. They weren't far behind. They had learned his tactics, his turns, his pace. A trio of bikes came up on his rear, weaving in and out of the alleyways, trying to box him in. Malcolm cursed under his breath. This wasn't good. He glanced ahead. The alley opened up ahead, but it was a dead end. No way out. The motorcycles behind him were gaining fast. He could already hear the whir of their engines just a few feet away. He needed to make a choice, risk the dead end or take a riskier turn. Without thinking, he yanked the handlebars hard to the right, throwing the bike into a sharp drift. Tires screeched as he skidded around the corner, missing a stack of crates by inches. The pursuing motorcycles didn't react fast enough. One of them slammed into a crate, sending it crashing to the ground with a loud crash. The other two bikes veered to avoid the wreckage, but it was already too late. Malcolm was gone. He was back in the maze of industrial streets, the wind whipping past him as he sped down the alleyways. Behind him, only the echoes of his victory, but he couldn't stop now. A glance at his rearview mirror showed only one motorcycle tailing him, the other two lost in the wreckage. The lone cop on the remaining bike was determined, but Malcolm had something the officer didn't. The bike's engine revved as the officer closed the distance. A clean shot. Malcolm's mind raced. He had to outmaneuver this cop, but he also couldn't afford to lose his advantage. The alleyways were becoming a blur of gray, metal, and concrete as he pushed the bike faster, squeezing the throttle with intent. He pulled hard to the right, using his momentum to propel him through another narrow gap between two towering shipping containers. The motorcycle behind him barely followed. He glanced down and saw a shadow moving quickly to his left, a car parked in the alley. The officer was trying to get ahead. No way in hell. Malcolm switched gears and slammed on the brakes. His tires squealed as the bike stopped suddenly in its tracks. The officer on the motorcycle was going too fast. He had no time to stop. Crash. The officer flew over the handlebars, hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. The bike slid to a stop, now useless. Malcolm took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't done yet. Now it was time to change the game. He whipped around, racing toward the intersection ahead. He needed a new strategy. This chase was only going to get worse if he didn't act fast. The sound of sirens and revving engines was already behind him again. More backup was on the way, but this was his chance to strike. The city was sprawling ahead of him, darkened alleys, tight corners, abandoned warehouses. But one path stuck out like a sore thumb. A construction zone. Malcolm grinned. Perfect, he muttered under his breath, making a hard right turn into the zone. The construction zone was a maze of half-built structures, unfinished scaffolding, and loose materials. The ground was rough, littered with debris and piles of gravel. The perfect place to lose any tail. Malcolm leaned low over the bike's handlebars, using his legs to steady himself as the wheels kicked up clouds of dust. The air smelled of fresh concrete and rusting steel. Behind him, the squad cars had started to fall back, but the sound of engines told him they weren't done yet. SWAT was still chasing him, but now they had to deal with a warped battlefield. Malcolm swerved around a stack of steel beams, narrowly avoiding a massive crane's boom that had been left hanging in the air. He could hear the heavy crunch of tires as the pursuit vehicles tried to follow, but the ground was too uneven for them to maintain any speed. The construction site had given him an edge, but the bike. It wasn't built for off-roading. Thump, a jolt shot through his body as he hit an abandoned piece of machinery, the bike's front tire buckling under the force. It skidded for a moment before coming to a halt. Malcolm jumped off, landing in a roll to absorb the impact. He wasn't injured, but his plan had just changed. The chase wasn't over, but his bike was no longer going to be his escape route. He turned and bolted for the nearest building, a skeletal structure of steel beams. 2 stories high. Behind him, he heard the distant sound of an engine. SWAT had found a way in. Malcolm's mind worked quickly. He couldn't just hide and wait, they'd catch up. But he didn't have time to fight them off in the open. He needed an advantage. He dashed up the stairs of the half-finished building, stepping carefully as his boots rang against the hollow framework. Every noise felt like an echo in the silence, his heart pounding as he reached the second level. From there, he could see it all. The streets in the distance. The construction zone with its maze of obstacles, and the cops, they were closing in. Malcolm's eyes darted around the area. A stack of steel pipes sat nearby, ready to be used. It was a makeshift barricade, the perfect tool to buy him more time. He ran over to it, grabbed a heavy pipe, and placed it at the edge of the building. His fingers gripped the cold metal, ready to use it as a weapon. Suddenly, he froze. A voice echoed through the open space. "I know you're up there, Agent." Malcolm's body went still. It was O'Reilly. He had found him. "You can't outrun us forever, you know." O'Reilly shouted, his voice filled with smug confidence. "We'll hunt you down. No matter where you go." Malcolm swallowed, his throat dry. He could hear the heavy footsteps of several officers approaching the base of the building. He had to act fast. He couldn't give them a chance to set up for a perfect ambush. Malcolm pushed the heavy steel pipes forward, sending them crashing down the side of the building. They tumbled in a cascade of noise, barreling down at the officers below. The pipe struck the ground with a deafening clatter. Officers scattered, some diving out of the way while others tried to take cover behind machinery. It was chaos. Malcolm didn't waste a second. He bolted to the edge of the building, and in one fluid motion, he jumped. His body sailed through the air, his feet catching a metal beam. He swung himself forward and, using the momentum, landed on a lower scaffold. Below him, the SWAT officers recovered quickly. But they were disoriented. They hadn't expected this level of aggression. Malcolm didn't stop. He was already running again, moving quickly across the scaffolding, his boots pounding on the steel. Another officer shouted, "He's on the scaffolding." But it was too late. Malcolm was already making his way to another part of the construction zone, a massive pile of cement bags and building materials. He dropped behind the pile, his breath steadying, his mind calculating. He could hear the officers' radios crackling, their voices filled with frustration. They were closing in on him, but now, they didn't know where he was. His plan was simple: confuse them. And when they're too close, he'll strike. He pulled his Glock from his holster, checking the chamber. Still loaded. With the sound of SWAT approaching, Malcolm crouched low, using the cement bags as cover. His eyes scanned the area, the tension in his body mounting with each passing second. He was ready. Malcolm's breath steadied as he crouched low behind the cement bags. He listened closely, every muscle in his body tensed, anticipating the next move. The sounds of SWAT officers were growing louder, their boots clanging against the steel and concrete of the construction zone. They were closing in on his position. He could hear them, their voices sharp with commands, their radios crackling with updates. "He's close. I can feel it," Officer O'Reilly's voice barked from somewhere nearby. His men had learned to search with precision, each one systematically checking every nook and cranny of the area. But Malcolm knew this territory better than anyone. He had spent years in covert operations, moving through hostile environments. This was just another battlefield. He could outthink them. He glanced over the top of the cement bags, noting the movements of two officers approaching his position. One was scanning the area with a flashlight, while the other was methodically sweeping his gun from side to side. They were getting too close. Malcolm took a deep breath. He wasn't going to wait for them to find him. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. With a quick motion, he unholstered his Glock and rolled out from behind the pile of cement. His body was low, moving with the agility of a predator. Before the officers could react, he was on them. A shot rang out from the officer with the flashlight. But it missed, just a hair's breadth away from his chest. Malcolm moved swiftly, ducking low, and tackled the officer to the ground, his elbow slamming into the man's throat. The officer gasped for air, his gun slipping from his hand as Malcolm twisted his arm behind his back, incapacitating him in one swift motion. The second officer, still recovering from the initial shock, raised his weapon in a panic. But Malcolm was faster. He drew his combat knife from his belt and, with a precise flick of his wrist, sent it flying through the air. The blade embedded itself deep into the officer's thigh, sending him stumbling back. Screaming in pain, Malcolm moved with ruthless efficiency, leaving the incapacitated officers behind as he sprinted toward another structure nearby, a steel warehouse with a side entrance. He knew this area. This was where he could make his final stand. His mind raced. There wasn't much time. He had to keep moving, or they'd overwhelm him. He could hear the sound of heavier boots now, the unmistakable stomp of SWAT officers in full gear, closing in on the main entrance. They were preparing to enter, but they didn't realize that Malcolm had already anticipated this move. He darted toward the side entrance of the warehouse, keeping low. The door was unlocked. He slipped inside without a sound. The warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of rusted metal and stored equipment. It was the perfect place to set a trap. He moved deeper inside, heading toward a stack of crates that hid a series of catwalks above. From his vantage point, he could see the officers approaching the building, their tactical radios buzzing with updates. He's in there. All units move in, cover all exits. Malcolm's lips curled into a faint smile. They had no idea where he was. He crouched on the catwalk, peering through a small window that overlooked the main entrance. Below, a dozen SWAT officers were organizing, preparing to breach the door. They were moving with precision, but it was too late. Malcolm shifted silently, positioning himself above the main entrance. He had one shot. The moment they opened the door, he was going to make it count. The tension was unbearable. He could hear the officers' boots on the ground, the soft click of their radios. The air felt thick with anticipation. Then, the door burst open. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He dropped down from the catwalk, landing with a roll that absorbed the shock, and immediately opened fire. The first SWAT officer barely had time to react before Malcolm's bullet pierced his chest, sending him collapsing backward. The others dove for cover as gunfire erupted in every direction. The warehouse became a cacophony of screams, shots, and ricocheting bullets. Malcolm moved quickly, his training kicking in. He dashed from one cover to the next, never staying in one place for too long. He fired accurately, taking out one officer after another, each bullet finding its target with deadly precision. His mind was in perfect sync with his body, every movement fluid, calculated, and efficient. Behind him, the remaining officers were scrambling, trying to get a bead on him. But the catwalks gave him the high ground. They couldn't reach him as quickly as he could pick them off. The advantage was his, but even as he fired, Malcolm could sense the tension building. They were regrouping. The remaining officers were forming a more coordinated defense, preparing to counterattack. He had to make a choice. Should he stay and fight, risking the possibility of being overwhelmed? Or should he find a way out and regroup? Malcolm took a split second to assess his options. As much as he wanted to take out the rest of them, he couldn't afford to get cornered. He needed to escape. He quickly glanced over his shoulder. The rear door was just a few meters away. If he could reach it, he'd be free. But there was a small group of officers between him and the exit. Malcolm's finger tightened on the trigger. He wasn't done yet. The gunfight had escalated. Malcolm could feel the intensity of the moment as the SWAT officers, now desperate, made a last-ditch effort to stop him. The air in the warehouse was thick with the sound of gunfire, the sharp crack of bullets hitting metal and concrete. He had already taken out several officers, but he knew there were more to come. His mind raced as he darted across the catwalks, moving with lethal precision, his feet barely touching the steel beams as he navigated the narrow, elevated pathways. Below, officers took cover, their weapons raised, scanning the area for any sign of movement, but Malcolm wasn't just reacting to their movements. He was orchestrating this fight. Forcing them to follow his lead. Every step he took, every shot he fired, was designed to keep them off balance, unsure of where he would strike next. He wasn't just a fugitive. He was the predator in this scenario, and the officers were the prey. With one smooth motion, Malcolm ducked behind a stack of crates, quickly assessing his surroundings. He could hear their footsteps approaching, the heavy clank of their boots echoing through the warehouse. They were getting closer, closing in on his position. He knew that if they got any closer, his escape would be impossible. It was time to move. Malcolm sprinted across the narrow catwalk, leaping over gaps in the structure with the agility of a seasoned operative. As he reached the far end of the warehouse, he spotted the rear exit. It was a small door, almost hidden behind a pile of scrap metal and discarded construction materials. If he could reach it, he'd be free, but just as he made the decision to make a run for it, the door burst open. "He's in here. Move in," shouted an officer from behind the door. The SWAT team had just gained access from the rear. Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. The exit was blocked. He had no choice but to fight his way through. It was do or die. In an instant, his Glock was back in his hand, and he fired 2 shots in quick succession, dropping the first 2 officers who had entered the doorway. The others scrambled, taking cover behind crates and metal barriers. The battle had intensified, and the warehouse had become a war zone. Malcolm's pulse quickened as he fired again, sending another officer to the ground. He was on the move now, weaving through the maze of stacked crates and steel beams, making it nearly impossible for the officers to track him, but even as he took out one officer after another, he could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. More police were on their way, and he had to make his escape soon. This would be his last stand. He glanced over his shoulder and saw that the remaining SWAT officers had taken up defensive positions, preparing to flank him from both sides. They were smart. They had learned from his tactics. Malcolm didn't have much time. His eyes darted around the warehouse, searching for his next move. A large stack of barrels sat at the far end, partially obscured by shadows. If he could get there, it would give him a good vantage point, one that would allow him to pick off the officers as they approached. He darted forward, using the crates and beams as cover. The moment he reached the barrels, he crouched behind them, taking deep breaths to steady himself. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just a fight for his life anymore. This was about sending a message: we know you're in here. You're not getting away. O'Reilly shouted from somewhere on the floor below. Malcolm didn't respond. He didn't need to. The time for words was over. He raised his Glock and took careful aim. One officer appeared in his sights, moving cautiously between the barrels, his weapon raised. Bang! The officer dropped before he even had a chance to react. Malcolm moved again, his eyes scanning for the next target. Another officer appeared around the corner, but he was too slow. Another shot, damn it! He's picking us off one by one. An officer shouted. The panic in his voice was palpable, but even as the officers scrambled to regroup, Malcolm's mind remained sharp. His training kicked in, and he could hear the sirens growing louder in the distance. More police were on their way. The odds were becoming overwhelming, and soon, this warehouse would be surrounded. He couldn't stay here much longer. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A shadow in the distance. It was O'Reilly, making his way toward a position to flank him. Malcolm knew that O'Reilly had been a thorn in his side the entire time. The officer had been the one orchestrating the chase from the beginning, the one who had made this personal. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He moved toward O'Reilly's position, silently, his steps measured, and then, just as O'Reilly turned a corner, he came face to face with the barrel of Malcolm's Glock. For a brief second, they locked eyes. O'Reilly's expression was one of shock. Disbelief. He had no idea who he was facing, not really. He had no idea that the man standing in front of him wasn't just another fugitive. Malcolm's voice was cold, low. "I'm not your enemy, O'Reilly." But it was too late for words. Bang! O'Reilly dropped to the ground. Malcolm stood over him for a moment, his eyes scanning the area. The sirens were nearly here. There was no time to waste. With a final glance over his shoulder, he disappeared into the shadows, disappearing into the chaos he had created. Malcolm moved swiftly through the darkened alleyways behind the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving him with a dull ache in his muscles and a burning need for escape. He could hear the distant wail of sirens, growing closer by the second. The authorities were closing in on him from all directions, and though he had taken down several officers, it wouldn't be long before reinforcements flooded the area. His mind raced, calculating his next move. He needed to get out of the city. But first, he had to get past the barricades they had set up. The last thing he wanted was to be trapped in a corner with nowhere to go. As he rounded a corner, he spotted a black sedan parked by the side of the road. It was a perfect opportunity. He knew that even though his escape route was limited, he could take the car and use it to get out of town. But before he could make his move, he heard footsteps approaching, quick. He ducked into a nearby doorway, pressing himself against the cold brick wall. His breath was shallow, his senses heightened. The footsteps grew louder, and he could hear muffled voices, but they were still far enough that he could make his escape unnoticed. Then, suddenly, the door to the alleyway creaked open, and two uniformed officers stepped out, flashlights scanning the surroundings. Their silhouettes were barely visible in the dark. But their voices were loud enough to make out. "He's got to be around here somewhere." He couldn't have gone far. One of the officers said, his voice tinged with frustration. The other officer nodded in agreement. "He's gonna regret this. We've got a whole team coming in. No way he's getting out of this." Malcolm's heart rate increased as he gripped the handle of his Glock. He wasn't about to go down easily. He waited until the officers were just a few feet away before he made his move. In a blur of motion, he stepped out from behind the doorway, raising his gun with lightning speed. The first officer went down instantly, his flashlight spinning wildly before it clattered to the ground. The second officer barely had time to react as Malcolm spun around and fired again. Another officer fell to the pavement. Malcolm didn't wait around to see if they were still alive. He had no interest in wasting time on anyone else. He was already moving again, his feet pounding against the pavement as he headed toward the black sedan. The car was his ticket out. He reached the vehicle and quickly checked to see if anyone was inside. The door was unlocked. Perfect, he slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, his hand already on the ignition. As he turned the key, the engine roared to life. Without a second thought, he slammed the car into gear and sped down the alley. The tires squealing as he made a sharp turn onto the main road. Behind him, he could hear the sound of sirens and police cars speeding through the streets. They were already responding to the chaos he had left in his wake. But Malcolm wasn't worried. Not yet, he knew the streets well, and he knew where to go. He weaved through the narrow city blocks, taking corners at breakneck speed, narrowly avoiding crashes as the police cars tried to keep up. He's in the black sedan. Came the voice of a police officer over the radio. Get units in position. We can't let him get away. Malcolm's grip tightened on the wheel as he pushed the car to its limits. The sirens were growing louder. But he was still ahead. His mind remained clear. He had been in worse situations than this. He just needed to keep his cool. As he sped through an intersection, he saw a set of flashing lights up ahead. Another police blockade. They were everywhere. But Malcolm had one last trick up his sleeve. He veered off the main road, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow alleyway that ran parallel to the highway. The police were momentarily caught off guard, their vehicles unable to follow as the alley was too small for them to navigate. Malcolm's heart raced as he pushed the sedan even harder, the tires screeching as they made tight turns. He was out of sight for now, but he knew it wouldn't be long before they were looking for him in these backstreets. He had to keep moving. His mind went into overdrive, thinking of every possible route he could take. There was a train yard on the other side of the city, a place where he could lose the police and vanish into the night. It was risky, but it was his only chance. He turned the corner onto a wider street, his eyes scanning for any signs of police activity. The city was alive with movement, but it seemed like he had a few precious minutes before they realized he was heading in the direction of the train yard. Just as he made another turn, he spotted blue and red lights flashing in his rearview mirror. The cops were closing in again. Not yet. Malcolm pressed the gas pedal harder, his foot digging into the accelerator. He was too close now. The train yard was only a few blocks away. He just had to keep ahead long enough to make it there, but then, the screeching sound of tires filled the air. From behind, a police SUV swerved into his path. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. The game had just changed. Malcolm's eyes locked onto the oncoming police SUV, its massive grille cutting through the night like a predator closing in on its prey. The tires screeched as the vehicle swerved into his lane, blocking his path to the train yard. His pulse quickened as he assessed the situation, his mind calculating the next move in a fraction of a second. There was no way around it. He had to act fast, or they'd box him in. The train yard was only a few blocks away, but he needed more time to get there. The street was narrow here, and there wasn't much room for him to maneuver. Without thinking, Malcolm jerked the steering wheel to the right, sending the black sedan into a sharp drift. The tires slid across the slick asphalt. The car momentarily losing control as it swerved dangerously close to the curb. For a split second, it felt as if he was going to smash into a lamppost, but he managed to regain control, the car roaring as he straightened out. The SUV was relentless, however. It immediately followed suit, roaring after him as it closed the distance. Bang! A shot rang out from the SUV, striking the rear window of Malcolm's car. Glass exploded in all directions, but he didn't flinch. His hand tightened around the steering wheel, his instincts kicking in. The police were getting desperate. They weren't playing around anymore. This was no longer just a chase, it was a pursuit for his life. Malcolm punched the gas pedal, his car lurching forward as he pushed it to its limits. The sedan screeched down the street, weaving between parked cars and narrowly avoiding pedestrians who scattered in every direction. His heart raced, but his focus was laser-sharp. This was it, he had no choice but to break free. The SUV was gaining ground, though. Its engine roared behind him, and another shot rang out. The bullet zipped past Malcolm's head, missing him by inches, but the heat from the shot was a stark reminder of how close the danger was. He swerved again, this time narrowly avoiding a pedestrian crossing the street. The pedestrian screamed in surprise, jumping back just in time. But the SUV didn't hesitate, it was closing in fast. "We got him now," one of the officers in the SUV shouted, his voice crackling through the radio. The sound of more police vehicles joined in, their sirens wailing as they flooded the streets, turning the chase into a full-on ambush. Malcolm had to make it to the train yard, but the roadblocks were starting to appear. Another set of flashing blue lights up ahead meant that they had set up a barricade just past the intersection. He couldn't afford to slow down, he had to find another way through. He slammed the car into drive, swerving to avoid a stalled delivery truck that had been abandoned in the middle of the street. It was a close call, but he managed to weave between the truck and a row of parked cars. The wheels skimming the edge of the curb, the police were now surrounding him on all sides. He could see the lights flashing in every direction, their coordinated movements closing in on him like a vice. "Pull over." A voice boomed from a loudspeaker attached to one of the police vehicles. "We've got you surrounded. There's no way out." Malcolm didn't respond. He couldn't respond. His mind was focused on the one thing that mattered, getting to the train yard. The sound of gunfire from the police SUV reminded him of how close they were. But he wasn't going to give up that easily. In a split-second decision, he took another hard turn, this time cutting down an alley that was barely wide enough to fit the car. The sedan squealed as it slid through the narrow space, scraping against the brick walls on either side. Behind him, the police SUV followed, but it was too large. It collided with the wall on the right side of the alley, its fender scraping against the concrete as the driver tried to regain control. Malcolm didn't look back. His foot slammed on the accelerator, and he darted out of the alley, racing toward the open space ahead. The train yard was only a few blocks away. As he approached the intersection, the flash of red and blue lights became blinding, but he pushed forward. This was the moment. The streetlights above flickered as the heavy rain continued to pour down, creating a slick surface beneath the wheels. Malcolm's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white from the pressure. He wasn't going to let them catch him, not like this. The train yard was in sight, but there was one last thing standing between him and his escape, a blockade of police cars, blocking off the entrance to the yard. He had no choice. Malcolm swerved the car to the side, aiming straight for the gap between two squad cars. His mind raced with the need for precision. He had seconds to make this work. A shot rang out, and Malcolm felt a sharp pain tear through his shoulder. He winced but didn't falter. He had no time to think about it now. The sedan crashed through the barricade, its front bumper ramming into the side of a police cruiser. The force of the impact sent the car skidding across the gravel and dirt, but Malcolm held the wheel steady. The train yard loomed ahead, he could make it. He just needed to get to the tracks. The roar of the police cars followed behind him, but he was already almost there. The train yard was now only a few hundred yards away. Malcolm's breath came in sharp gasps, but his focus never wavered. The sedan's engine roared as he pushed it to its maximum speed, his mind calculating the distance to the tracks, the sounds of pursuing police cars only getting louder. The pain in his shoulder was a dull throb, but he couldn't afford to let it distract him. As he neared the edge of the yard, he noticed the steel tracks glinting in the dim light of the street lamps, like a lifeline. The familiar sound of a train's horn echoed in the distance, signaling that it was coming closer. If he could just get onto the tracks, he would have a way out. The thought of the escape route gave him hope. But it also made him painfully aware of how close the police were. Behind him, the police SUV was relentless, closing in at full speed. Two more squad cars flanked it, their sirens wailing like wolves on a hunt. Malcolm's heart pounded in his chest as he turned the wheel sharply, sending the sedan into a tight swerve toward the train yard's iron gates. The sound of metal on metal rang out as he rammed the gate, the impact jarring his teeth together. The sedan bucked, but the gate crumpled under the force, allowing him to drive through. He floored the gas pedal, and the sedan shot forward, its tires screeching against the gravel. Behind him, the police were right on his tail, but they were slower now. Their vehicles unable to handle the rough terrain of the yard. The SUV was too large, and the squad cars were losing ground. Malcolm could see the train tracks now, running parallel to the edge of the yard. The train was getting closer. He could hear the thunderous sound of its engine, the screeching of the metal wheels as it hurtled down the tracks. He had one chance, just one, as the police cars skidded to a halt behind him, their tires spinning in the loose gravel. Malcolm slammed the sedan into a sharp turn, steering it toward the train tracks. His heart raced as he crossed the tracks at an angle, the wheels of his car grinding against the metal for a split second before he managed to clear the crossing. In the distance, the train's headlights illuminated the darkness, getting closer. Malcolm barely had time to register the full force of the situation before he saw it, the blinding light of the train barreling toward him. But it wasn't just the train he had to worry about. The police weren't far behind, and as the train neared, they fired again. 2 shots ripped through the air, one hitting the rearview mirror, shattering it instantly. Another grazed the side of the sedan, leaving a streak of sparks in its wake. Malcolm didn't flinch. His hands were steady as he gripped the wheel, his eyes locked onto the tracks ahead. He could see the train's massive headlights now, the locomotive's front thundering toward him. His car was already halfway onto the tracks, and he was almost across, but there was still some distance to cover before the train passed. Time slowed, the lights of the train became blinding, casting a harsh shadow over the landscape. The roar of the engine was deafening now, and the police were right behind him, their sirens blending with the cacophony of the train's approach. He didn't have much time. Malcolm pushed the car even faster, his foot pressing harder on the accelerator. The train was now only seconds away, its powerful horn blaring as it neared the crossing. The police were almost within range, but they hesitated, likely fearing the train would block their shots. The train collided with the crossing signal, and the gates began to lower, almost like a final warning. But Malcolm was already past them, now fully on the tracks. The wheels of the sedan screeched as they skidded over the metal, and for a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though the car might derail. But Malcolm held the steering wheel tightly, his pulse racing. As the train roared closer, it felt like the earth itself was shaking beneath him. The police cars had stopped just short of the tracks, unsure of whether to pursue him further. They could do nothing now but watch in stunned silence as the train came closer. Malcolm's heart raced, and then, the unthinkable happened. The train's horn blared once more, but it wasn't just the sound that startled everyone, it was the train's unexpected movement. In an instant, the massive locomotive veered slightly off the tracks, colliding with the police SUV that had dared to chase him down. The front of the SUV crumpled under the force of the collision, the police car being sent flying through the air as the train's momentum pushed forward. Malcolm didn't look back. He floored the gas pedal again, heading straight for the end of the tracks, where a secret entrance to the underground tunnels awaited him. But just as he crossed the last set of tracks, a sharp explosion erupted in the distance. The blast of sound sent a shockwave through the air, rattling the ground beneath him. A police car had attempted to break through the barricades, and in its desperation, it had collided with a massive fuel tanker. The fireball from the explosion was visible even through the haze of rain. Flames shot up into the sky, and black smoke began to swirl across the horizon. But Malcolm was already gone. As he disappeared into the darkness of the underground tunnels, the nightmare of the chase seemed to fade behind him. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did bringing it to you. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Have any thoughts on the story? What do you think about the officer's actions and the way things turned out? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. And hey, if you know someone who'd love this kind of action-packed, suspense-filled story, share it with them. Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.